as we witness the total blood moon in Leo, we are called to heat our emotional waters and integrate the strategic brilliance of Pallas Athena to anchor a new Aquarian vision. Hey there, Truth Seeker. Welcome to the Star Kittens community where we discuss 13 sign astrology. Are you in alignment with your divine design? Do you want to master the metaphysical reality? Open the doors of perception. Each planetary body is an archetype, a template, if you will, that helps us interpret human behavior and the world around us. The more awake and aware we are, the more synchronicity will show up in your life. Our focus today is the lunar eclipse full moon in Leo, with the Sun conjunct Pallas Athena in Aquarius. To help us reach more souls with this important message, please like, share and subscribe. There's a lot going on, so let's jump in. Kia ora, David.
Kia ora.
We are going to discuss the lunar eclipse today, or at least what are the position of some of the key planetary bodies during this time. The full moon happens on the 4th of March at 12:37 a.m. here in New Zealand, which means that we actually get to be able to observe this blood red moon, which is really cool. So if you are listening in New Zealand, the time to really start paying attention is just after midnight. That's when the total eclipse begins. And for those who are not in New Zealand, I'm sure you'll see some beautiful images coming up. So what are the other planets or planetary bodies that we're discussing today? Of course, the moon in Leo, the sun is in Aquarius, and the sun is making a conjunction with Pallas Athena. What would you like to start with today?
Well, let's talk about this lunar eclipse for starters. The fact that I didn't know it was a blood moon. You're saying it's a blood moon as well? Okay. So it will be very dramatic, which is consistent with Leo's exuberance and expressiveness. That's kind of a perfect combination. A blood red moon lunar eclipse in Leo being dramatic. That's the cosmic intelligence having a laugh, I think. But so there's some interesting energies going on here. Certainly we have the fire of Leo and we have the water of the moon, which isn't necessarily a harmonious relationship in terms of those two elements. Fire has the ability to heat water up. So if we think about water as emotions, then certainly there is an aspect of the eclipse agitating us emotionally. But at the same time, water can also put out fire. So those who are naturally more expressive and exuberant may in fact be a little subdued under this energy. Whenever there's a eclipse of this nature, as we talked about last time, it amplifies the underlying energies of both the planetary bodies that are involved and also the sign itself. So it's like taking Leo and putting that, putting the Bunsen burner to it, really turning up the heat. But equally, it's taking the moon's intensity, emotional intensity, and turning up the heat on that too. So whichever way we look at this, whether it's from the water and the emotional side of the moon, the more introspective side, or the more extroverted aspects of the sun overlaying the moon in this case, you have a word that comes to mind immediately is there's a tension there. There's a tension not only because we have a full moon, so the sun is on the other side and the moon is on one side, and there's always tension at full moons. But you've also got this tension that exists because the Leo energy and the moon energy are not, as I said before, particularly compatible. So the word emotional intensity, or the words emotional intensity, come out, but I'd like to go a little further than just talking about the emotions, because we often refer to the moon as the repository of soul. And what we mean by that is that the moon contains our memories of past and parallel existences, not necessarily in this earthly realm, but in any realm. We believe that the soul is eternal, but the body passes away. And so the soul inhabits the body, and the soul has the ability or capability to inhabit any physical reality. And given that, what that means is that when we talk about the emotion or the moon as the repository of soul, that is our unconscious awareness or knowledge that we don't necessarily tap into consciously. So in other words, when you listen to speakers like Bruce Lipton and Joe Dispenza, they say, and many others, they say that human beings use only about 5 to 10% of our conscious awareness. The rest of that, let's say it's 10% of conscious awareness, the rest of that, 90% in this case, is what we call, or we assign to the moon's memory, or what psychologists call the unconscious. So the unconscious part of us in astrology, when we're using archetypes, is the moon. In the Vedic faith or Vedic system, they call the moon energy, or that unconscious energy, the manas, the M-A-N-A-S. And they talk of different types of minds. And I'm referring to this because most people will talk about the emotions, and I get that with the sun and the moon, and there's an emotional trigger and an emotional intensity. But if you go to another layer of what the moon actually also represents, it is these subconscious memories. So therefore, there's every likelihood that subconscious memories, i.e. those that are not in our waking awareness, will come to the surface under this eclipse. What that means is that we could have some pretty vibrant dream life or experiences, depending on what state of mind you are in and around this eclipse. There could be all kinds of kind of extra dimensional experiences coming through, because the soul itself is awakening to the energies of the full moon, particularly those energies coming from the other side with the sun in Aquarius that we will touch on a little later. So we have emotional triggers going on one level, but then we have this much deeper level, which is a lot more, it's a lot harder to grasp, if you like, because it's our subconscious that could also be activated. And the contents of our subconscious is unknown to us. That's why it's called the subconscious. So be prepared for some crazy things to come up and emerge into our awareness that we may not even have realized that it was there, that it existed. People talk about deja vu experiences and feelings of connecting with past lives and this sort of thing. That's what we're talking about. We're also talking about psychic type experiences that can emerge from the subconscious. So there's a huge amount at play here, but it's on levels that go well beyond the physical. If the Leo energy is physical, then the moon energy is both psychic, emotional, and soulful. And it's difficult to say what will happen, because every soul is different and every soul's experiences are different. But what we can be sure of is that full moons are a time of revelation and realization. It's a time when things come to light. And our subconscious is where we instinctively behave. So we talk about instincts and intuition. We'll talk about intuition, and I'll draw a distinction between intuition and instincts when we talk about the sun in Aquarius, which I believe is intuition, and I'll get to that through later. But for now, just to be clear, we believe that the moon and gut feel and instincts are all wrapped up together, but instincts and gut feel are different from intuition. And I'm very clear about making that distinction, because when the moon is triggered, then our instincts can also be triggered. And if our instincts come from memories of past or parallel lives, then there's a chance that we may express ourselves with this emotional energy of Leo. We may express ourselves in ways that surprise others and even ourselves. We may strongly react to something, to triggers that we feel it's just coming from, literally from the depths of our soul. So there's those multiple layers with this full moon eclipse: the emotional, the physical with Leo, and the soul level activation and those instincts. And who knows what could come to the surface. We're very much talking at this point, though, about our individual experience of the full moon. And when we talk about the sun in Aquarius, we will talk about a collective experience of the full moon.
Yeah, and I think it's there are so many people who haven't yet embraced that distinction between the Leo energy and the Aquarian energy. They so see that Leo is playful, and we'll often see it playful with a group of people, but we very much see Aquarius as being part of the collective. And that's I guess also that push-pull between the sun and the moon at this full moon. So let's then dive more into that Aquarian energy. We spoke about Aquarian energy at our last episode, because the new moon then was at that 0 degrees Aquarian, so we did quite a bit of a deep dive into that Aquarius energy. So the sun is still very much in it. How are you seeing that Aquarian energy? Has it evolved in the last couple of weeks of the sun being in that sign?
I think in this case what we have with the Aquarian energy, and as we just touched on there, is if the moon is the individual experience and the Aquarian is the collective experience. But they're two sides of a coin, in so much as it's individuals that make up collectives, and there isn't a collective unless you have a group of individuals. So understanding our emotional and individual and soul level activations on one side and how that feeds into the Aquarian energy on the other. And I touched before about soul memories. Well, one of the what could emerge here from the moon side is a desire to reconnect with tribes or groups or people that we may feel very strongly emotionally drawn to be part of something at this particular full moon, and going beyond it as well. And that would be a manifestation of the Aquarian energy. It's almost like the Aquarian energy represents the possibility of connection on the collective level. But for some, we need to be emotionally ready for that, especially for introverts, right? So, if the moon is an introverted sign and both Leo and Aquarius are very extroverted signs, then this will be very demanding for those who like to be quiet and more lonesome and introspective versus those who like to be part of a crowd, right? So Leo definitely likes to be part of a crowd. So for them, it's no issue at all. But let's not forget that not everybody's extroverted and outward going and outward facing. So this will add to that convergence of the Aquarian energy on one side, pulling us out to be part of a collective and communities, may be quite stressful for those who tend to pull the other way. But I think the Aquarian energy too is a call to humanity coming from the universal intelligence to be more of ourselves, to express ourselves, to get out there and show the world on an individual level, but also as part of groups, what we are capable of as a species, as a collective, I think that there's no doubt at all that the world is vibrating in so many ways. It's rocking and rolling around its identity and who we are. When we see the institutions of Saturn, which we've talked about at length, collapsing and giving way to the new age of Aquarius, the age of Aquarius being more collective and collaborative and bottom up and groundswell, as opposed to top down pyramid structures, command and control type structures, very rigid structures. We're talking in Aquarius about very different types of expressions for groups and collectives. And I think it's important here that the Leo in moon energy says, bring your best self to the collectives. Express yourself in the moon, but be prepared to be part of a group. And what comes to mind is that, when you listen to great bands, for example, or you see great teams, and there's that expression, there's no I in team. So the I of Leo dissolves somewhat in that team collective structure. And that can be quite hard as well to deal with, because if Leo moon is individual, then Aquarius Sun is collective. And there's a tension. I keep talking about these sort of dichotomies, or these tensions. There's, to what extent do we allow our individuality in the Leo moon to be lost in the collective grouping and interactions? And I think here it's not about either being totally individual or totally, giving up your individuality for what I would call the hive mind. It's about actually finding a little bit of both and saying, even within teams, you can still express your personality, you can still bring your fire, you can still bring your energy and not be lost within that team environment, within that collective environment. So it's about finding that balance. I think this Aquarian energy on one side and the moon energy, that intense individuality that's brought by the Leo influence on the moon there, I think there's a happy medium to be struck here. Certainly a Leo moon in an Aquarian sun is a desire to be seen, heard and validated. And it's also in a way of drive for companionship. If we watch kids playing with each other, some kids really want to be seen and validated and heard, and others don't. And that's kind of what I'm getting at. It's that combination of, there are some who naturally will gravitate towards groups, and there are others who really want to be part of a group, but they need to find their inner fire. They need to come out of their shell, that introspective shell that the moon is, and that's where the Leo energy says actually that's a benefit if you want to be part of a group or a tribe, because it says all of us, no matter what, we have something to bring to the table. So be willing to express yourself. The last thing I'd say is that if we look at the spirit animals for Leo, and then for and the icon for Aquarius, which is the water bearer, and then of course the spirit animals for Leo are the lion and the lioness. What I would say about the lion and lioness is, immediately people say, well, they're the king of the jungle, or they're very protective. But I think that energy, when fused with the water bearer, which is this collective energy, and it's a desire for the inner child of Cancer to be brought to the surface. And the lion and the lioness energy is about nurturing that inner child. If the moon here is our inner child, and you talked before about Leo and play, and when we learn to play with others, then we're talking about that Aquarian energy really expressing itself. I think that protecting that inner child is part of the lion and lioness energy, because we have to nurture that within ourselves before we can truly bring it to the collective. And it's a very interesting combination, Leo and Aquarius, because you've absolutely got individuality and collective. And they are not like the fire of Leo and the water of the moon, they are not necessarily compatible, but they can be made to work together, but it takes some energy and some effort in order to accomplish that.
Yeah. And stay true to the way you do life. I think it's important that when you do become part of a collective is that you bring your gifts, because I believe that we all are here with our gift and to share that with the collective. So just to draw the picture, during this full moon, the moon is at 24 degrees Leo. That is the true position in the night sky. Then on the other side, we have the sun sitting at 15 degrees Aquarius, making a tight conjunction with Pallas Athena at 14 degrees Aquarius. So how is this conjunction hindering or supporting this full moon energy?
Well, I think it's very supportive. When we look at the mythology of Pallas Athena, and we look at the Greco-Roman stories about her and who she was, this woman was highly regarded within the Roman pantheon for her intellect, for her ability to use her whole brain. I talk about whole brain. She was somebody who was capable of using both her instincts and her intuition, and I touched on that before. She was in touch with both the left hand and the right hand, or the left hemisphere and the right hemisphere of the brain. So in other words, she was able to integrate both the logical, critical thinking of the left brain, or the masculine type energy, with the more intuitive, instinctive energies of the feminine. And Pallas Athena was seen as a strategist. So she had the ear of the generals and the Senate within that Roman configuration. She was one of the ones that was considered to be a strategist, an advisor, a counsel to these who were prominently learned men that were in charge of the affairs of state. And why that is so interesting, not only from a breaking the glass ceiling concept, insofar as we're talking about the Roman pantheon and the story of where Pallas Athena comes from, that she broke the glass ceiling quite literally. She was able to break into what was a patriarchal command and control regime and sit there and be considered an equal. So I touch on the story of Pallas Athena just as a preamble here, because when we think about Aquarian energy and we think about the most typical example that most people will relate to, which is the 60s and the so-called quote-unquote age of Aquarius, which was a time of great change and reform on the planet. Some of the most incredible inventions, even small things like the smiley face emoji came out of the 60s, and we still have that today. Blue jeans came out of the 60s. Bikinis came out of the 60s. Rock and roll music came out of the 60s. Broadcast television came out of the 60s. If you go to the internet and you think about that age of Aquarius in the 60s, what actually happened in the collective was that we had times of great technological, social change. There were massive shifts within the social contract. We had the activation of women's rights, of black rights, of civil rights. Some of the greatest orators of the modern age were in the 60s. The great speech of Martin Luther King was in the 60s. We had fabled politicians. We had massive movements going on, Woodstock and social movements and rebellion against the status quo. So again, I'm sort of layering this in and saying we have the strategic thinking of Pallas Athena juxtaposed against these great shifts in the collective that were taking place in the 60s. And here we are again in 2026 on the verge of more great shifts in the collective. So what I am saying here is that Pallas Athena is encouraging us to be strategic, is encouraging us to think not only big picture, but also to get into the detail of what's required to transition and transform in the Aquarian age from the age of Pisces. If the structures of politics and banking and economics and trade and whatever else is being put on the table in the Aquarian age, then we need great strategists and we need great thinkers to be able to look at that and think, okay, so what worked and what isn't going to work going forward for the collective. So we're talking about very high levels of big picture thinking that Pallas Athena brings to the table, which is so necessary when we're going through an Aquarian age. What comes to mind with Aquarius also is, and this Leo energy, is often in groups you get the loudest voice. Is that a group of people will get together and they decide we need to think about and talk about and discuss and contemplate change within our collective, within our community, whatever that looks like. But often that discussion, that group dynamic is dominated by the loudest voice, which is that Leo energy. So what Pallas Athena is saying here is that, if you're operating in these groups and you're considering changes, they may be small changes, they may be big changes, they may be big ideas for the planet, they may be small ideas just for your little community, then yes, the loudest voice is important, but we need to be very tactical and very strategic and very cunning almost as to how we come together and cohesively prepare a vision for the future, rather than having a group of individuals all pulling in different directions. So that the Pallas Athena energy is bringing together and developing almost like not a manifesto, but that's the wrong word, but that's the idea. It's a set of ideas about how we can move forward, a vision for how we can move forward in these new paradigms that are going on. And as I said, I touched on what happened in the 60s. There was an enormous amount of change. One of the things that's interesting is to go to the internet and ask even one of the AIs what were all the technological, social changes that happened in the 60s, and you'll be amazed. There's a huge list of them. The last thing I will say, and I touched on this before, just to close, is the difference between intuition and instinct. If we believe that the moon is instinct, i.e. it is our memories coming to the surface that allow us to respond to a certain situation, then intuition, we believe, comes through the third eye. And the intuition in the age of Aquarius, if we think about who the guardian of Aquarius is, it's Uranus. And Uranus is the awakener and the enlightener. And it's the Uranian energy, which obviously is fused into Aquarian energy. It permeates it in every way. There will be people in the Aquarian energy who have these incredible intuitions and incredible insights about where the collective can go. And it will be, we're talking about the visionaries and not just the dreamers. We're talking about the people who can see a way forward and can articulate that, but it's not coming from instinct or memory of the past. If memory is the past, then intuition is the future, brought forward into the now. So Pallas Athena was not just looking at what worked in the past, i.e. memory. She was also able to peer into the future through intuition, i.e. through that Aquarian activation of that third eye energy, and then bring that back to the present. So you get this nice combination of the present, the past in the moon, the present, and the future being brought into the present, and we have this nice synergy of the past can become the present and the future can become the present when we have an Aquarian Sun on full blast, which is what's happening at this eclipse.
That was so beautifully explained. Thank you so much. I have been busy setting up a newsletter, so if you would like to stay in touch with us, I will post the link in the description. We won't bombard you, but the initial few emails will just kind of give you an understanding of why we follow 13 sign astrology, what is Ophiuchus and the ether energies, and how can this apply to your life for your divine design. You can stay in touch with us on Telegram, Instagram, and of course listen on your favorite podcast subscription, whether that's Spotify, Audible, or Apple Podcast. Any parting message, David?
None other than to get out and if you can, enjoy this full moon. I know looking at them, I know it's late for some, but actually looking at them, it just has a power. I remember the last time there was a full eclipse and I was lying on the grass. It was again quite late at night, but I was just lying on the grass. There was a whole lot of people there. It was really late, and I was surprised just how many people, and there was oohs and ahs, and it was just a eerie, cool experience. And I had some music that I was listening to, and as I literally lay on the grass and looked up at the sky, it was just a fantastic experience. So I would encourage those that can to get out and experience it, and that would be my parting message.
Yes, so just to clarify, the eclipse will start on the evening before this new moon, so on the 3rd of March is when it will start. So if you're in New Zealand, make sure that you go outside. I might even wake my kids up, who knows. Anyway, ngā mihi, until next time.
Namaste.